What happens when a cruel school principal publicly humiliates a disabled student without realizing that Keanu Reeves is watching from the back of the auditorium? What began as a horrifying moment of injustice transformed into an encounter that would change an entire school forever. And by the time the assembly was over, no one would forget what Keanu said or the life-changing gift he gave that brought everyone to tears. Oh, and before we begin, tell us where you're watching this from. We love seeing your reactions in the comments. The massive auditorium of Westridge High School buzzed with the chaotic energy that only 1,000 teenagers can generate. Fluorescent lights shone harshly against cream-colored walls, decorated with faded banners celebrating long-ago sports victories. Students filled row after row of uncomfortable plastic chairs, their attention scattered, their voices creating a deafening symphony of disinterest. This was supposed to be a special day. The school had gathered for their annual Achievement Awards ceremony, where students who had excelled in academics, sports, and community service would be recognized. But for most of the teenagers present, it was simply a welcome break from classes. Principal Richard Montgomery stood at the podium, his tall frame draped in an expensive suit that seemed at odds with the school's visibly aging facilities. At 57, Montgomery had been the principal of Westridge for 15 years. His steel-gray hair was always perfectly styled, his posture military straight, his voice commanding. The students feared him, the teachers obeyed him, the school board trusted him. But what most people didn't see was the bitterness that had settled into Montgomery's soul over the decades. He had once dreamed of running a prestigious private academy, not an underfunded public school in a struggling district. Each passing year had hardened his resentment, calcifying his heart against the very students he was meant to nurture. In the front row sat 16-year-old Jamie Collins, nervously adjusting the brakes on his wheelchair. Jamie had been paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 3 years earlier, but he had never allowed his disability to define him. Despite missing months of school for surgeries and rehabilitation, he had maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. More impressively, he had started a peer tutoring program that had helped dozens of struggling students improve their grades. Jamie's program was the reason he was at the ceremony today. He had been nominated for the Community Impact Award, the school's highest honor for student initiative. His mother, Sarah, a single parent who worked 2 jobs to support them, had taken the morning off to attend. She sat in the audience, her eyes fixed on her son, her face glowing with pride. What no one in that auditorium knew was that in the very back row, partially hidden by shadows, sat a man in a simple black t-shirt and worn jeans. His long hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and a few days' worth of stubble covered his face. He had entered quietly, seeking no attention, just as the ceremony began. This man was Keanu Reeves, who had come to the school as research for an upcoming role as a teacher. The principal had been informed of his visit, but told no one else, wanting to avoid disruption. Keanu watched silently, observing the dynamics of the school, taking mental notes on how the teachers interacted with the students, how the teenagers responded to authority. He noticed Jamie immediately, not because of the wheelchair, but because of the quiet confidence in the boy's posture, the genuine warmth in his smile as fellow students stopped to speak with him. Principal Montgomery worked his way through various awards, his voice monotone, his enthusiasm clearly manufactured. Basketball champions, science fair winners, perfect attendance recipients. Each student walked across the stage, received their certificate, shook the principal's hand, and returned to their seat while polite applause rippled through the crowd. Finally, it was time for the Community Impact Award. Montgomery tapped the microphone twice and cleared his throat. The Community Impact Award recognizes a student who has made an extraordinary contribution to Westridge High School. This year's finalists are Thomas Westbrook for his environmental cleanup initiative, Sophia Martinez for her work with the Immigrant Assistance Program, and he paused, his lips tightening almost imperceptibly. Jamie Collins for his peer tutoring program. Jamie straightened in his wheelchair, his hands gripping the armrests. His mother leaned forward in her seat, clutching her purse tightly. The auditorium grew quieter. And the winner is... Montgomery opened an envelope with deliberate slowness. Thomas Westbrook. Applause erupted as Thomas, a tall senior with perfect grades and an acceptance letter to Princeton, strode confidently to the stage. Jamie's face fell for just a moment before he composed himself and joined in the applause, genuinely happy for his fellow student. Thomas accepted his award with a gracious speech, thanking his parents, his teachers, and his friends for their support. As he returned to his seat, Principal Montgomery stepped forward again. Before we conclude today's ceremony, I'd like to speak briefly about standards and expectations at Westridge High. Something in his tone caused the audience to still. Teachers exchanged uneasy glances. Students sensed the shift in atmosphere and focused their attention on the stage. This school has a proud tradition of excellence, Montgomery continued, his voice taking on an edge. Our awards recognize true achievement, accomplishments that require dedication, hard work, and yes, ability. He paused, his gaze settling on Jamie. It has come to my attention that some people believe we should lower our standards to accommodate certain situations, that we should hand out recognition based on sympathy rather than merit. A hushed shock rippled through the audience. In the back row, Keanu Reeves sat up straighter, his brow furrowing as he sensed what was coming. Mr. Collins, Montgomery addressed Jamie directly. Your tutoring program, while well-intentioned, simply doesn't meet the criteria for our highest honor. It was included as a finalist out of courtesy. But let me be clear, this school will not diminish its standards for the sake of inclusivity. Jamie's face went pale. His mother half rose from her seat, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. Students turned to look at Jamie, then back at the principal, uncomfortable with the public humiliation unfolding before them. The real world doesn't give out participation trophies, Montgomery continued coldly. The sooner you all understand that, the better prepared you'll be for life after Westridge. The auditorium had fallen so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Several teachers looked horrified, but remained frozen in their seats, their jobs silently hanging in the balance if they dared to challenge the principal. And then, from the back of the auditorium, a chair scraped against the floor. A figure stood up. "Excuse me." The voice was quiet, measured, but somehow carried to every corner of the room. Heads turned, whispers erupted as recognition dawned. "Is that?" "No way." "Keanu Reeves." Principal Montgomery squinted into the dim lighting at the back of the room. "Mr. Reeves, we're honored by your presence, but we're in the middle of a ceremony." Keanu began walking slowly down the center aisle, his presence commanding attention without effort. Students gaped as he passed. Teachers straightened in their seats. "I was invited here to observe your school," Keanu said, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable intensity. "I came to learn about education, about how young people are shaped by their experiences in these formative years." He continued his steady walk toward the stage. Montgomery's smug expression began to falter. "What I've observed today isn't education," Keanu continued. "It's the opposite of what schools should stand for." He reached the front of the auditorium and stopped beside Jamie's wheelchair. He didn't look at the boy yet, keeping his focus on the principal. "You just told these students that worth is measured by some narrow definition of achievement. That kindness and service to others is somehow less valuable than traditional success." Keanu shook his head slowly. "That's not preparing them for the real world. That's preparing them to perpetuate everything that's broken in it." The auditorium remained silent, but the atmosphere had changed. Where there had been shock, there was now a growing energy, a collective holding of breath. "I've spent my life around people society considers successful," Keanu said, his voice gaining strength. "Fame, wealth, influence, I've seen it all. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that none of those things determine a person's value or impact." Montgomery's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Mr. Reeves, while we appreciate your visit, you are not an educator. You don't understand the standards we must maintain." Keanu smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "I understand more than you think. I understand that true education isn't about maintaining standards. It's about elevating humanity." He finally turned to Jamie, his expression softening. "May I ask about your tutoring program?" Jamie, still stunned by everything happening, nodded. I started it after my accident. When I was in the hospital, I fell behind in classes. Some friends helped me catch up. I realized how much difference one-on-one help can make, especially for kids who are struggling for all kinds of reasons, not just medical ones. "How many students have you helped?" Keanu asked. 47, Jamie replied, gaining confidence as he spoke about his passion. "We started with 5 tutors. Now we have 22. We meet 3 times a week after school. Last semester, every single student in the program improved their GPA by at least half a point. 12 moved from failing to passing." Keanu turned back to Montgomery, his eyebrows raised. 47 young lives changed, academic trajectories altered, futures brightened. "And you don't consider that an achievement worthy of recognition?" The principal's mouth opened and closed without sound. In the audience, Jamie's mother was now standing, tears streaming down her face. "I'd like to see the records of your award winners," Keanu continued. "How many lives have they directly impacted? I'm not diminishing their accomplishments. I'm sure Thomas's environmental work is important and valuable. But to suggest that Jamie's contribution is somehow less worthy because of what exactly? His wheelchair, his approach, his focus on helping others rather than helping himself." A teacher in the front row, Mrs. Daniels, a veteran English instructor who had remained silent for years under Montgomery's leadership, suddenly stood up. "Jamie's program saved my son," she said, her voice shaking. "My own child was failing math last year. He was too embarrassed to tell me. Jamie paired him with a tutor who connected with him in a way I couldn't. He went from a D to a B+. He's applying to colleges now." Another teacher stood. "The tutoring program has improved overall attendance in my classes by 20%. Students who were chronically absent now show up because they have support." A student rose next, then another, and another, each with a story about how Jamie's program had helped them or someone they knew. Principal Montgomery's face had lost all color. The control he had maintained through intimidation for 15 years was unraveling before his eyes. And at the center of it all stood Keanu Reeves, calm and resolute, a quiet force of nature. "I didn't come here today to cause disruption," Keanu said when the testimonials finally subsided. "But I believe deeply that we have a responsibility to recognize truth when we see it, and to stand against injustice, especially when it impacts young people." He turned to address the entire auditorium now. "Each of you matters. Each of you has value that can't be measured by a certificate or an award or a college acceptance letter. The measure of your worth isn't what you achieve for yourself, it's the impact you have on others." Jamie looked up at Keanu, his eyes wide with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu nodded, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "If you don't mind, I'd like to learn more about your program, because I think it deserves more than recognition. It deserves support." The assembly dissolved into controlled chaos after that. Students surged forward, phones out, eager to capture the moment when Keanu Reeves had stood up for justice in their school. Teachers huddled in small groups, their expressions a mixture of relief and concern about what would follow. Principal Montgomery, after attempting to regain control of the room, had retreated to his office, locking the door behind him. In a quiet corner of the auditorium, Keanu sat with Jamie and his mother, listening intently as they explained the tutoring program in detail. Its successes, its challenges, its potential for growth. "The biggest obstacle is space," Jamie explained. "We're limited to the library, which can only fit about 25 people at a time, and we have no budget for materials. Everything comes out of pocket or from donations." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "What would you do if those limitations were removed?" Jamie's eyes lit up. "We could expand to serve the middle school too. Create specialized tracks for different subjects. Maybe even develop online resources for students who can't stay after school. It sounds like what you've created could be a model for other schools," Keanu observed. Sarah, Jamie's mother, wiped away a tear. "He's poured his heart into this program. To hear the principal dismiss it like it was nothing." Her voice broke. Keanu's expression darkened momentarily. Some people measure value in the wrong ways, but today showed that the truth eventually finds its voice. 3 days later, the school board convened an emergency meeting. The video of Principal Montgomery's public humiliation of Jamie and Keanu's intervention had gone viral, generating millions of views and thousands of outraged comments. Parents had bombarded the district with calls and emails demanding action. By the end of the meeting, Montgomery had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. But that was only the beginning of the changes at Westridge High. 1 week after the infamous assembly, students arrived at school to find construction vehicles in the parking lot. Curious, they gathered around as workers unloaded materials and equipment. Mrs. Daniels, who had been appointed interim principal, called an impromptu assembly to explain. This time, the atmosphere in the auditorium was electric with anticipation rather than dread. "I have some extraordinary news to share," she announced, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Westridge High has received an anonymous donation of $2 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The donor has specified that $1 million is to be used to create a dedicated tutoring and mentorship center equipped with the latest technology and resources. The remaining $1 million is to establish a permanent endowment for student-led community initiatives." The auditorium erupted in cheers. In the front row, Jamie sat stunned, his hands gripping his wheelchair. "While the donor wishes to remain anonymous," Mrs. Daniels continued with a knowing smile, "they did ask that the new center be named the Collins Initiative for Peer Education, in honor of its founder, our own Jamie Collins." The students rose to their feet, applauding wildly. Jamie's classmates surrounded him, patting his shoulders, shaking his hand, some even hugging him as tears streamed down his face. What no one knew yet was that the anonymous donation had come with a personal note for Jamie. "Your courage to help others despite your own challenges exemplifies the best of humanity. This gift isn't charity, it's an investment in the work you've already proven is valuable. Sometimes the world doesn't recognize what matters most. Your job isn't to wait for that recognition, but to continue doing what's right regardless. You've already changed more lives than you know, including mine." KR double quote. 6 months later, the Collins Initiative Center opened its doors. The state-of-the-art facility included 16 tutoring stations, a computer lab, a recording studio for creating educational content, and a community meeting space. The program that had started with 5 tutors and a corner of the library had grown into a model that educators from across the country came to observe. And though Keanu Reeves never publicly acknowledged his connection to Westridge High, Jamie received occasional messages from different cities, simple notes of encouragement or questions about the program's progress, each signed with the same initials, KR. 1 year after the infamous assembly, Jamie received a package. Inside was a small model of a wheelchair made from silver, fashioned into a keychain. Attached was a note that read, "Never see limitations, only possibilities. Your work matters. KR double quote. Jamie wore that keychain every day as a reminder that sometimes the greatest achievements aren't recognized with awards or ceremonies. Sometimes they're measured in the lives you touch, the hearts you change, and the courage to stand for what's right, even when you're sitting down. And the lesson of that day spread far beyond the walls of Westridge High, touching millions who watched the video online. True value isn't determined by those in power, but by the impact we have on others. It's not about the recognition we receive, but the difference we make. As for Principal Montgomery, he eventually resigned from education altogether. The last anyone heard, he was working in corporate training, teaching executives about inclusive leadership and the importance of recognizing diverse forms of achievement. Sometimes, the harshest lessons leave the deepest impressions. The impact of that single day, when cruelty was confronted by kindness, when injustice was met with quiet strength, continued to ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could have predicted. All because one man, famous not for his wealth or his movies, but for his humanity, decided to stand up for a boy in a wheelchair who had already been standing tall in all the ways that truly matter. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories about celebrities who use their fame for good. And share in the comments a time when someone stood up for you when you needed it most. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but changes everything.